So let me know where you're signing on from. I'm curious to hear where everybody's joining us from today. Stacy's here from Portugal. I think she's going to get the award for the farthest presentation. Sam's here in Fallsville. Sam, nice to see you. I'm here in Fallsville too, so you're just down the street from me probably. Other things that I'd love to hear from people. Oh, Alexis is here from British Columbia. Hi, Alexis. Is how big is your team currently? So, today's session is going to be all about team building. So curious to hear how big of a team you're working with right now. And also just like what's bringing you to this session. So we're going to just, and yes, definitely Stacy, subcontractors are most definitely a part of the team. They're really essential to mine. And I'll talk about that today. So how big's your team? What is getting you excited or thinking about building or expanding your team? Like, why was this topic important to you? Curious to hear that in the chat. And while we're letting everybody else get kind of logged in and thinking about that, I also want you to share with me if you've got any thoughts in terms of like the burning questions you were coming to this session today. Obviously, I prepared content in advance, and we've got a lot to get through today. But if there are really burning topics or burning questions you have, should throw those in the chat. We're seeing kind of similar sized teams here. So some folks have a team from like 4 to 8, some have a 6-person team. Cassidy, good to see you. He's got a team of 7. And Stacy said she's curious how I run my team. Thank you, Stacy. We've got quite the team going these days. I'm pretty proud of them. Alexis shared she's a solo operator with occasional subcontractors, but they've never worked out well. So she wants to learn all the things. Awesome. Okay. I have an Alexa call coming in real quick, so let me deal with that. Give me 2 seconds. It's funny, so I set up an Alexa in my office, and it's still set up to the Alexa device that's at my house. And my friends and have kids who know how to call our Alexa when they want to try and get a hold of my son. So that was what that was about. But let's get into this topic today. So we're here to talk about team building. We're here to learn about what it really takes, particularly to bring on team members virtually in this current climate. I'm going to focus a lot upstream today on hiring too, because I think a lot of folks are thinking about expanding their team, and that's really a key piece of the puzzle. And I knew from talking to a few of the folks who are here today that they're in a hiring process. Let me know with a thumbs up in the chat if you can see my screen. I'm going to change slides here and just talk a little bit about my team building background real quick. So many of you know me personally, but I've had a background in really building teams for my entire career. I have just been in a unique position that I've always been a part of kind of a startup environment. And so that really involved figuring out how to scale things pretty quickly. And whether it was working for a software company or starting to build my own team, it was always a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I need like 10 people yesterday. And so I've developed over time a lot of best practices when it comes to building small teams and then scaling them. And I've also led multiple virtual teams for companies from around the globe. So I think about Stacy, sharing that she's here from Portugal, but I used to have to work a lot with a team that had folks in the UK and folks in Australia. And there was a lot of dynamic there that, whether that was like cultural differences in terms of the ways we might communicate or personality types, trying to integrate all those different global teams together, there was a lot that came out of that. And then in this past year, I've been growing my own team. So my team was a team of really 2.5, I'd say, last year. I had a VA and like 1 full-time employee, and we've scaled to a team of 8 this year, some of which are subcontractors that are part-time and some are full-time employees. And so that's been an awesome practice, not just to scale a team for another company, but scaling my own team. So I'll talk about all those things in today's session. Just a reminder, let's keep things collaborative. I love seeing everybody's thoughts in the chat. So please keep continuing to share. If you've got questions as you move through, would love to hear them. Now, this is where we're really gonna head today. And I think it's just important to lay this groundwork. So first we're gonna start with what I call the pre-work. So this is upstream work where we really want to take a moment to think in advance before we hire. So the biggest mistake I see in clients that I work with is that they wait to hire until their back is up against the wall, or maybe they don't really have a sense of direction. They're just feeling like they're overwhelmed and they need some help, but they don't really have a clear sense of strategy as to what they actually need from a hiring perspective. And that can lead to a situation where you hire somebody, but they're not actually aligned from a skills and abilities perspective with what your company really needed to grow and scale. So we're going to talk about that pre-work first. What are the thoughts and practices you can put in to make sure that when you get to the point of hiring somebody, you're on the right path there. Next, we'll talk about the process itself. So what are the things that you can be doing to really pull in the right people? I am a big believer that hiring the right people is not something that happens by accident. And it takes a lot more than just putting a good job posting out there. I think a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to just put out a perfect job posting. I'm going to sit on my hands and the candidates are going to appear. But I'm going to tease apart some ideas in terms of what you can be doing to really attract ideal candidates, and also how you can be screening them to make sure they're a right culture fit for your company. And then lastly, we'll get into what I call the post work. So this is where we really revisit what you need to continue to do to build your culture and your team as it grows. So we'll dive into things you can do to, check in on new team members, and also how to make sure that they're integrating into your company culture. We're also going to talk about the ways you can keep your existing team members happy and engaged as your company grows. So hopefully that sounds exactly like what you all were hoping to cover today. And if there's more that you need, of course, put it in the chat, ask questions in the chat, but let's dive in. Okay, so one of the many things that I coach and consult with clients on is hiring. Oftentimes I'll be working with a client and they've gotten to a point where they're launching a new product or they're growing their business, and they realize we've got to bring more team members in. And I see way too often that people wait to hire until they're in a pinch. And what I've found from my experience is that on average, it can take up to 90 days to not just onboard a new team member, but it can take even longer than that to just find somebody that's a right fit for the role. So I want you to be thinking about today, how can you set yourself up not to hire when your back is up against the wall, but also thinking about ahead of time, what are the people I need to start bringing in to build out my organizational structure and start to have this strategic mentality when you notice those gaps rising inside the company, so you can start putting the word out for those employees long before you're feeling overwhelmed. So let's talk about the work you should be doing now so that you can set yourself up to really build your team with intention. So I can imagine you all know the feeling. We're entrepreneurs here. It's a safe space. You're overwhelmed. You've got too much work on your plate. And we just start wishing that we had somebody around to lighten the load. This is usually the point, when we're in that overwhelm. For me, it was like, oh gosh, look, it's 2 a.m. again, and I'm still working on client work. This is when I started to really consider for my own team that I needed to hire someone. But before we race off and just, throw up a job posting or start trolling old LinkedIn connections, we really need to just pause and get really, really crystal clear on what it is we're doing in any given day and what your team members are doing if you have them, so that then you can start to determine where a new employee can fit into the mix. So whenever I'm working with a client in this arena, and I see that they're starting to get this overwhelm going, or they're just having an itch to hire somebody, I make them work through a very, very simple exercise. So what I have them do is every single day for a week, I have them keep a list. This could be, if you're virtual like me, on your Todoist or on some Evernote or something like that, or it could be a physical list that you keep next to your desk. Maybe you've got a legal pad there. And I literally have them document every single thing they're doing every single day. And I know that seems a little bit arduous, but I think a lot of us don't realize the amount of work we're doing that we could be delegating to somebody else. And so just by taking that practice of writing down everything that's been on your plate, it allows us to actually step back and look at how much of that work really aligns with what we should be doing as the leader of the company, as opposed to work that we can be passing off downstream to somebody who's maybe more junior level, but still equally qualified to do that work. So if you have a team already, the other thing I recommend here is encourage them to do the same. So maybe you have somebody on your team who is, feeling a little bit pinched. Maybe they've got too much client work on their plate and they're feeling an overwhelm. Have them do this too. Or if the whole team's feeling a little pinched, again, same ritual. Ask the whole team to start really documenting what you're doing, and then have a team meeting where you guys can start determining what you should be delegating. So after a week's worth or so of tracking, and you want to make sure it's like a fuller week if possible. It's not the week where like half the team's on vacation or there's not really a ton coming in. It should be one of those weeks where you're feeling a little full. So after you keep track of all those daily activities, then we can get together and we can really start to break down what is in alignment in terms of what people's roles really are and what could or should be passed on to another human. So what I mean by that is, especially in a startup environment, we wear a lot of hats. And so for me, when I was in early stages of my company, it was like, I was CEO, I was sales leader, I was doing all of the marketing, I was doing all of the bookkeeping, I was doing all the new client proposals. And when I really started to document these things, I was able to start identifying which of these items really align with my truest, highest role, which is that as CEO and leader of the company, and which of these are not things that I necessarily like doing or am even good at doing or should be delegating to somebody else. And when it was just me, the first thing that I started to offload was any administrative or operational work. And I just have a confession to make here, and some of you know me personally. I am terrible when it comes to anything that's like really dotting the I's, crossing the T's. And so for me, anything that had to do with my schedule or, arranging back and forth meetings with people and really required my eyeballs on it, I just couldn't be the one to do that. And it was sucking up a ton of my time going back and forth with people in emails. And we like to think that things like Calendly can just completely solve it for this, giving somebody a calendar scheduling link. But it was really critical for me to bring in a virtual assistant to start taking these things over. Now, as soon as I brought her on, I started to think through what are all these other little things that are truly administrative tasks that she could help with. So sending client thank you gifts, sending little reminder emails, cleaning up data lists. So for example, after this webinar, I'll have a list of attendees from this webinar that need to be followed up with. So she will come in and she will take that list out of Zoom. She'll make sure it's put into our email marketing system with the right tag, and she'll make sure that all of you get the right follow-up email tomorrow. And so that was like the first thing that I started to take off my plate, was those really high-level administrative things. Now, the next thing that you can start moving down the list with is, where can I find categories or buckets? So the first hire I made after that was what I would consider like a junior marketing coordinator. Again, I was recognizing I was spending a ton of time just getting my newsletters out the door and also some sort of follow-up email copy. So I brought in somebody with junior copywriting skills to take that work on. But your goal here, by determining what you should be delegating, taking that list of activities and really starting with, man, this is not the best use of my time, is you can start to tease out categories of work that could be covered by another person. Now, if you've got a wider team that you're wrapping arms around, have them share what they have on their plate and start to see if you can bucket things, because some things may be all operational, some things may be all administrative, some things may be all sales focused. And, although when we start out, we might have somebody who wears a couple hats, like maybe it's somebody who's 50% of their time is focused on marketing and 50% is focused on sales. That's okay. We just want to start figuring out what are those common threads or those buckets that we can put the work into, because that's going to really determine who's a fit for this role. If we recognize we have all sales and marketing related work, we need somebody with that level of expertise and, quite frankly, a personality type that's pretty hungry and willing to go after things and follow up. And that's a really different hire than somebody who likes doing administrative work. So Notice what those buckets are, start to kind of put them together in a doc if you can, so you can align. And then that can give you a path of like, okay, is this enough to be a part-time role for somebody? Is this actually a full-time role? Is this a couple roles? And it's also important here to maybe prioritize. Maybe we can't take every single thing off of our plate yet, but at least you'll have a vision of what somebody could be doing now, and then maybe downstream, either other work they could be growing into, or maybe that's the next person that you're going to hire for. Now, the last thing I'll say here on the delegation front is I think it's really, really important for us as leaders to just make a mental note of any time we're hesitating to hand off something to other people. So I fought this a lot early on. I'm a control freak. Feel free to raise your hand on the chat if you are one. But there was this moment or this mentality where I had this assumption that I was going to be the best person to do this work. And so I have to ask myself now repeatedly, why do I think I'm the best person to do this work? For me, early on, I really struggled this with content creation because I felt like every single thing that came from the brand had to come from me. But I started to look at the brands that I really wanted to emulate, bigger brands. And I know for a fact a company like Ellevest, who I love, even though their newsletter, says it's from Sally maybe writes a few sentences of that, and then her team takes on the rest of the work. And that doesn't diminish the quality of the work they're doing. In fact, it might even bring in somebody who's an even stronger copywriter than she is. And so for me, I start to really look at anything I'm taking off my plate as an opportunity to create meaningful work for other people, and just always challenge my assumption that I'm the best person to be doing this work, especially if it doesn't align with my true role in the company, which is as the leader of strategy. Okay, so hopefully you guys have some ideas there of in terms of building the list. And I saw a lot of hands raised when I asked if people were control freaks. So again, why do I think I'm the best person to do this work? Ask yourself that repeatedly if you identify in that way. Okay, so now that we might have a little bit of a list, I want you to start thinking about not just the work that's presently on your plate, but it's also important to look at your company from a holistic perspective and start to identify where gaps are that might stand in the way of getting work completed or stand in the way of the company really growing into its full potential. So 4 areas that I think are really great to think about specifically are: 1, tasks that don't always get done or just seem to don't have a home really. Like, so if there's a task where, nobody's got an umbrella where it's like, oh yeah, that's clearly Brianna's job or that's clearly Stacy's job. If there's no ownership to a task, then that's a really good identifying opportunity to say that's a gap. We need to find somebody who we know they're the go-to person for this. So one of the ones that I see a lot people juggle or end up outsourcing to me and my team is marketing. So marketing is a big one. It should be its own umbrella. In big companies, it's a full marketing team. And so if following up with your customers, sending a newsletter, all those things, if that doesn't have a home, that might be a good indicator that there's a gap inside your company in the marketing space. Other things I think about here that usually fall into the cracks are following up with your customers, updating your social media. That might need to fall under a marketing home. Updating your website regularly. So I want you to think about and maybe make note here, where are the areas in your business that aren't thriving because no one is there to tend to them? And for you as a leader too, I think we get a little guilty about these areas. We try and shove them under the rug, but we don't have to be experts at everything. Again, that mentality of this could be great, meaningful work for somebody else is super, super important. So think about that. And also think about it in the context of where is there procrastination? If it's just you and there's activities that for a fact when it's on your to-do list that you just kind of push off and push off and push off, ask yourself, what is these proverbial hot potatoes that you push off or everybody in your team passes around or is doing last minute? What is that work that nobody likes doing? I think we assume that there's some work in the business that is just like that, and that is always going to be pushed off, and it doesn't have to be that way. I feel this way again around administrative tasks. It's just not my thing, and I have an admin who loves doing things like fixing my Excel spreadsheets, and it's meaningful work for her. So just remember, just because it's your point of procrastination doesn't mean it won't be inspiring work for somebody else. And again, that's a good indicator that it might be a gap in the company. Now, particularly for you as a leader, I also think it's really important to look at this common thread between where we procrastinate and where we lose energy. So also talking to your team or thinking to yourself, what are the things that we're doing that feels like the biggest drain on you or feels like the biggest waste of your energy? Some common ones that come out of my coaching clients are creating client proposals, scheduling meetings, following up with prospects. Those are all things that for some people, particularly if you're introverted or you don't like writing or things like that, could be a really big drain. And so it's really important to think about trying to align you and your team with the work that gives you the most energy. And I know that sounds like a little woo for some people, but really you want the best work product possible out of everybody with your team. And so figuring out and asking your team, what is the biggest drain? A lot of us think about what is the biggest time suck. That's not necessarily the only metric we want to work with. What is the biggest energy drain? What is the least inspiring work? Because again, somebody may be inefficient at something, but because they're not good at it. Samantha just put in the chat, playing to people's strengths too. Exactly. It might be an energy drain for somebody because it doesn't play to their strengths. It doesn't hold their interest. And so why not hand that work off to somebody who's passionate about it and also is maybe better at it because it plays to their strength, or it's something that they're quicker at because they're excited about doing that work. So, a little Marie Kondo message here of like, what sparks joy for your team is really important. And my whole motto is like, outsource what doesn't spark joy for you. So again, how can you align that work or identify those gaps based off of where the energy drain exists inside the company? And then the fourth thing here is true talent gap. So anywhere where you feel like you're overextending yourself, or you're having to over-explain yourself, or you're just out beyond your abilities, or another team member is out beyond their abilities, that's what I call a talent gap. And these are going to exist all over the place when you're just starting out, especially if you're making junior level hires. And sometimes that's an opportunity to coach somebody into a higher caliber of work, but sometimes you might have to bring in somebody with a more senior level experience. I work with a lot of accounting professionals, and people have to bring in tax managers for a reason. Your entry level hires may not have the ability to do that high level review work, and that's okay. So ask yourself, what are the skills we're missing? Who needs more management if you've got an existing team? And what areas would it be beneficial to bring in more experience and expertise in the company? I'm doing a little bit of an evaluation of this right now within our team and figuring out, who can I actually help elevate into the next layer of work, and who could actually benefit from having a layer of management over them to coach them into that next level of their work coming to life. So keep a list of all these elements, hold them up alongside the things that you said that you should be delegating. And then from there, you're really going to have the key pieces you need to start building a role description. So we're walking down a path of this top line, like upstream work is really important, because I think what a lot of people do is they just start with a role description, but we want to think upstream so we're actually building from what we need. So it's a one thing to get an idea of, what you think you might need to bring on board from a workload perspective, but it's actually another thing entirely to really pause and consider what kind of person is really going to be ideal for your company, and not only where it's at, but where you're aiming to go. So this is where I see too many people skip ahead in the hiring process. They just dive straight into going to Indeed or LinkedIn or wherever and start putting, a job posting up. But they haven't really come to a consensus and sat with themselves for a minute to say, who is an ideal candidate that's not just, capable of executing on these tasks at hand, but also makes a sense for our company culture and how we're evolving and growing. So the first thing that I think is a really important question to ask yourself here is, what personality type should this person have? So we have we have a little element to our internal company culture. We call it GSD, and GSD stands for Get Shit Done. And I have a team that is very much a team of go-getters. We are self-starters, we are fast-paced people, and we like to get shit done. And so that was something that it took me a really long time to learn that I had to hire for in other people, and I even had to test for in other people. And it wasn't that we don't love and respect people who work at a slower pace, but literally it would cause our whole team to grind to a halt when we had somebody who wasn't able to, be in Slack all day and know how that worked and respond to people. And we first thought, oh, maybe this is like a tools and technology training opportunity, but really we've discovered it's a personality type thing. You're either like to work through your workday at a certain pace, or you're somebody who's a little slower and needs to have a few more conversations before you get started. And we're growing at a pace where we just don't have time for that right now. Maybe we'll change down the road, but GSD is a little bit of who we are right now as a brand. And so that's a personality type that we really have to hire for. I also know a lot of people who love bringing some element of personality profiling into their company culture so that they can not only get a sense of who they are and what they're working with in terms of team personalities, but also, what is the personality types that they want to attract. The next thing I want you to think about here is what is the work ethic and attitude you want from somebody. So making sure that that work ethic fits with the rest of the team or brings something complementary to the table is really important. If you've got a team who's got, again, this hustler work ethic, and you bring in somebody who's a lot more casual in their working style, that can be really challenging. When I worked with teams overseas, this was probably the biggest struggle we had from a communications and a work standpoint, was because the work culture in Australia was a lot more laid back, and we were go, 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 hustler mentality here in the States, and then we had a really uptight team in the UK. And so trying to align those work ethics and attitudes was really challenging at times. And so that's something to really think about when you're trying to get clear on an ideal candidate. Also thinking about somebody's learning style. So, oftentimes, we have a large responsibility to make sure our new hires are successful by teaching and training them and really bringing them on board. But what does your teaching and training look like currently? Is it something that you will have to, really walk somebody through and they'll have to be on board for that? Or will it involve self-study? Those are two different working styles, to be a self-studier versus to have somebody hold their hand through a training process. And so you might want to look at your thoughts in terms of how you train people and make sure you're hiring somebody with that in mind. 2 or 3 other pieces here are, how do they handle feedback? So are they good at, taking verbal feedback? Do they like it written out? How do you give feedback? You got to think about that. Or how would somebody's managers give feedback? And are we hiring a candidate that's going to align with that? How do they solve problems? So, is this a person who knows how to look for answers themselves, or are they going to rely on other people to answer all their questions and bog folks down? For me, I really like people who ask questions, and I always say there's no such thing as a dumb question, but I'm also coming with the expectation that you're only going to come to me with questions when you haven't been able to seek the answer out for yourself, especially if it's something related to tech, or something that you can find by Googling, and you ask me that question, I'm going to get a little annoyed with you, because you can go out on the internet and solve that problem. And so thinking about, what is the problem solving style someone on your team needs to have. And then last but not least, what experience must they have? Like what is absolutely essential? So I have a dear friend, he has an accounting practice that he's an operational leader for called Prefix Accounting. And they made a pivot to the hospitality industry a little over a year ago. They redid their entire brand. And what they came to realize is that they can only really hire team members going forward that have had experience in that hospitality space, because that means that they understand those clients, they can relate to them, they can empathize with them that much better. And so they really trimmed their team around people who had that experience in the hospitality sector, so they would align with the clients that they're serving. And so it's important to think about, what can you train for here? Like a lot of the technical stuff we can train for, right? But I can't train people to care. I can't train people to hustle if they're, a slower paced person. And so thinking about, what makes up the personality and you know, the work ethic and the feedback and all these pieces of an ideal candidate is really, really important, because now we're going to go out and write a post and a job description that attracts that right person, rather than just casting a wide net for everybody under the sun and then having to waste time weeding through those humans. All right, hopefully y'all are still with me there. Let me know again in the chat if you have questions. But let's talk about coming up with role descriptions, because this is really important. I'm a writer at my core. I love doing this. And so what I like to do when we get started with a role description is start by taking those delegation items and the gaps and just looking at them side by side and saying, you know, where is there overlap? Where's there common grounds or buckets that we can see the work going into? You know, again, is the work more operational? Is it administrative? Is it marketing focused? Is it a bit of all three? And we need to be really clear in a candidate description that we're seeking somebody who can wear multiple hats. Now, if you only have room to hire one of those people, but there's a lot of buckets, which of those elements is most pressing is the question you want to ask yourself, and why, because that's what you should emphasize in the role description. And then you can come back and maybe hire somebody down the road. Now, if you have room to hire more than one, then you should think about, how can I split this work up? Now, even if your team is early stage, this can also be a really great moment to pause and think about how your team should grow over time. So what I think is really important is those first 5 hires. They really, really shape your culture as a company. And so I want you to be thinking about in this moment, if you're one of those early stage folks, who are the people that I really need to build the foundation of my company and build the foundation of my culture? You know, because ideally the folks that you hire early on grow into more leadership roles over time. And so I want you to be thinking about that up front and say, you know, what do I need now? And if I hire the right person, what role should they grow into? Who should they report to now? And who should report to them down the road? And even if it's just in broad strokes, this can be a really great opportunity to write out a little bit of a vision of what your org chart could become prior to putting together the role. Because again, you want to hire somebody that can grow over time with the company, and you could even outline that growth path as part of the role description or as part of the hiring process to pull in a candidate that's eager to grow with your company. So I like to ask myself in these moments, like, what are the layers of leadership going to look like for the company over time? How big do I want to be eventually? And these questions can help you get clearer on shaping that vision, and also get clear on who the right next person is to be hiring, so that you can put yourself in the right path to lead you towards your growth goals as an organization. So with that in mind, that like painting yourself a little bit of a picture here, your next step is to really put together the title for this job and the job description to go with it, to seek out the right person that fills the gaps in your growing team. So things that I like to remind people here are, 1, great titles have a little bit of personality, but are also really indicative of the level of leadership and experience that that position holds. So I'm not actually a big fan of like frou-frou titles like goddess of XYZ. Like, I think that, you know, especially in the space that I work in, which is professional services, it leads to people not being taken seriously, or people going, well, what do you actually do on any given day? And so, you know, it's really important to make sure that a title holds the right level of authority needed for the kinds of customers or clients or partners or other team members that the employer will interact with. So back in the day, I used to work for a company called Fathom. And when I worked at Fathom, we had originally titled all of our entry-level support resources as customer success specialists. And we thought that was a great title at the time. It was very popular in the tech space. And we were working with the accounting profession who, you know, had come across that title in other engagements and basically saw anybody with that title as just a baseline support rep. And so we noticed a lot of our reps were getting blown off. People were no-showing on their calls or not responding to their emails. And we had a few people who were really moving upstream to lead more consultative calls with accounting professionals, really be more of an account manager. And we changed their title to a partner development consultant. And things changed overnight because of their title. They were doing the same exact job, but the way that that title was seen by the potential customers that we were working with was completely different because it had the word partner in it. So one, accountants saw themselves as a partner with us as opposed to just a customer. They also had the word development and consultant in it, which is what those people were doing on a day-to-day basis, was meeting with those firms to talk them through how their practice could be built around a product like the one we were offering. But it suddenly made those gatekeepers or those leaders inside those firms take our team a lot more seriously. And so I like to really think about, what is the conversations this employee needs to go into? What are the meetings that they are going to be present in? And how would I want somebody to recognize their authority and treat them based off of the title they hold today, and also the title that they're going to grow into in the future? I also think it's really important when thinking about titles to make sure that title is also something that stands out for the right person for the role in the caliber you aim to hire. So for example, I work with a lot of professional services folks who are in the cloud accounting space, and I noticed a big difference when they crafted job descriptions that included like a title like cloud accounting specialist instead of just hiring for a bookkeeper. When they were just hiring for bookkeepers, they got a ton of just baseline bookkeeping knowledge, people who were working in desktop-based software. But when they added the word cloud to it, suddenly it attracted a different caliber. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of thinking about, the words that we use in a title, but they really, really matter. So make sure to pay attention here. And you can always draw inspiration too. I think it's great to go out and look at other companies, how they're titling people, in the roles that they're seeking for, to get some ideas and inspiration. I'm going to take a quick moment before I talk about the description itself to answer this question. So somebody wrote in, I'm curious if you've ever had a great team member who doesn't thrive at all in her current role. And if so, how do you move that person into a role where they thrive while also getting the other work done? I'm not ready to add another full-time team member, but I care about this team member and want her to thrive, but I still need to get shit done. Okay, this is a great question. So what I would do in this situation is sit down one-to-one with that person, and in that same spirit of the documentation where we took everything and we put it, out in a list, do that list exercise with her, and then have her be clear in what are the areas that she thinks that she's really skilled with, and what does she feel like she's not as strong at, and why. And this is an important conversation to be a little bit vulnerable and open with as a leader. But if you can talk her through and give clear feedback as to the areas where you think she's lacking, and try and discern here, like what is the difference between the type of work that she's good at and the type of work that she's not? Is it a lack of experience? Is it a lack of interest? Is it a lack of confidence? And then start to set up a plan. If it's a lack of confidence, there's some more training that can come in, or some more feedback from you as a leader. If it's a lack of skills, again, more training. Or if it's a lack of interest, you guys can build out a plan to start transitioning that work to somebody else. But, being very clear as a leader, I still need you to do these things right now, giving clear feedback as to how she can improve, and then hopefully setting a plan into place to start transitioning her away from the work she's not good at and into the work that she is. So hopefully that's helpful feedback there. And when you do get ready to hire that next person, take those pieces that you intend to pull off her plate and use them to write this new role description. So a great role description really breaks down to 5 elements. Who we are, so who is the company? Start with that. You're selling them on the story of your company, all of the promise and potential, the customers you work with. Just sell your story in like one clear paragraph at the start, because that's the first thing somebody's going to read. They should know who you are as a company, and if it's interesting and compelling to them, then they'll continue to the job description. Then who they are. So what I mean by that is literally writing almost like a love note in a paragraph to the person you aim to attract. You are a go-getter. You are passionate about, details. You love digital marketing. Whatever those things are, write about who that person is, even if it's just a person you're making up inside your head that you hope exists, so that they can read it and go, that's me. Then the third piece, what does the job actually entail? So this is the pieces that you're pulling out of that list of what you're doing that you should be delegating, or from those gaps that you identified. And, very clearly, you will be responsible for day-to-day operations of all, email marketing systems, creating all the social media posts, whatever that is. List those things out really clearly and specifically. Should be one clean sentence for each element that goes into the job in terms of what it entails. Then, what experience is required? This is our fourth thing. What is essential? Do they have to have experience in a certain industry? Do they have to know how to use certain software systems? Do they have to know how to be pleasant on the phone with customers, even if that customer's being a bit of a jerk? What are the experiences that are required? And then fifth, what will go into an offer? So what will go into offer is, do you offer benefits? What is the pay band? And the band can be, the range for this role starts here to here. What kind of work environment can they expect to have? How much work? Is this a part or a full-time role? All of that goes into that fifth element of, we will be offering this in exchange for you joining our team. Now, as you're writing this job description, write all of this out as if you're speaking directly to that ideal candidate that you're aiming to attract, in a way that would compel them or excite them. You want somebody to see this job description and go, this is me, this job was made for me. And make note of the attributes that we talked about a little bit upstream. Again, like if there's industry knowledge or a personality type that you're going for, or a feedback style this person needs, make sure those things are integrated into the language that you write out. And, I think about here in this moment, like I have a couple clients that I work with who are actually building their team specifically with a goal to attract single moms. It has to do with who they are as a brand and their own individual stories. And they have a really clear goal to attract single moms who are looking for part-time work, and they're looking for a level of flexibility. And so, as I was working with her on writing some of her role descriptions, it's like really important to think about what are the keywords that you should include in this job description to catch the eyes and the attention of the team member you're missing. So again, this is a little persona profiling work here, but sit down and think about who's that ideal person? What would I have to say to catch their eye and attention? Okay, that's the pre-work. It's a lot, but it's really important. And I think it's really, really critical to stop before we just jump into the hiring mode. This is where mistakes are made. I will say it later on, but I'll say it here now. My biggest mantra with hiring is hire slow, fire quick. And the reason being is because anytime you're hiring from a sense of urgency and not from a sense of strategy, you will end up with a wrong candidate. So if we want to go and be able to really seek out someone that's a right fit for our company from a long term and not just spend energy hiring over and over and over again, it's really important to do that upstream work. And then we can dig into the real process of hiring somebody that's truly a fit for the growing team. So now we've got, the pieces of a job posting, right? If we've done all this pre-work, we've got a doc. And if you've got that doc and if you've got a team, let your team members be a part of that process as well. Let them, contribute their thoughts and ideas and feedback, especially if there's somebody who's going to be working directly with this hire, and or if you're going to have them be a part of the hiring process. I am a big fan from a team building perspective in getting everybody you can involved in the hiring process. It really helps us battle our own bias and blind spots as leaders. And it's a really great way to make everybody feel like they're a part of the growth of a company. But once you guys have done that, once you've dug apart the doc and you feel strong in it, then you've got to go ahead and put that content up on your website. So I really recommend, from a search engine optimization perspective, to create a specific page in your site called jobs or called we're hiring. And you can draw inspiration from other people's sites that you admire or companies you want to emulate. A lot of companies I know make a point to have the first half of this page look like a little bit of a marketing pitch for their company. It's a great photo of the team if they've got one. It's like, at other companies I've seen, like a photo of the kitchen with all the fancy food and fruit. Like what are the cool things that would inspire somebody? Maybe it's mention of the benefits package you offer, or maybe it's work-life balance, whatever that is. First half of the page, because it's going to be a page that lives there hopefully for the future. And then underneath that, that's where we put our posting that is available. Make sure to also, include the fact and have your site reflect your culture, because if anybody's going out and they're going to look at your job posting, the next thing they're going to do is troll around on your site. And so even though it feels like, oh gosh, another thing to do, if you're putting up a job posting on your site, but your website is not up to date in terms of how many team members you have, or your value statements, or your culture, or diversity and inclusion, whatever those pieces are, make a point to update them in advance of pushing this posting out to the world. Because the first thing somebody's going to do is start stalking you on the internet. And if your company doesn't reflect who you are, they may pass on you simply because of something you hadn't shared. Also, once we've got a job posting, we want to put it out on external sites as well. And so, we've all gotten ads for the companies, but this is sites like Monster, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, etc. Great way to spread the word to a broader base. Those sites are going to use AI to pull in candidates and eyeballs to your posts. You can obviously spend money to be able to get more candidates. And then also, if you're thinking about people from like a more freelance or contract perspective, there are sites like Upwork or Freelance or Guru, which are great to be able to do more contract-based hiring. Now, again, I said, if you want to pay to promote and get more eyeballs on, that's always an opportunity here. But just make sure that if you're taking that action, that the site gives you the ability to really tailor the eyeballs you're getting. Nothing frustrates me more than putting out something on a recruiting site and not having an opportunity to really target the demographic who's going to see the ad, because you don't want just anyone. You've spent all this time and energy getting really clear on who that person is. So you want to make sure that if you're spending advertising dollars to get that person, that you can tailor from a demographics piece to get the right qualified candidates in the door. Okay, now we got to draw attention to the thing. We got to spread the word. Things that I do in this moment is I email my network, I start talking to my network, I ask my staff to do the same, I share this posting on social media, and I actually start spreading the word sometimes, even if I don't have a picture of the ideal candidate, even if I'm just starting to have those feelings of overwhelm. I would say 50% of my job postings I've hired directly from sitting down and going through this process. And another 50%, I've just gone to somebody I know and said, I need help with insert XYZ. And then I've started to really clarify what that role is around a candidate that's come my way. So sometimes that happens. And I think that, again, it's important to remember that a lot of this takes time. And so, what this really requires is that even if you don't have the exact role description hammered out in stone, you're clear on what is most important when it comes to culture and experience. And even if it feels a little early to hire, you can start putting the word out to people and asking them, do you know anyone who fits this mold of the candidate that you're looking for? Or do they know somebody who might know somebody who's aligned with that? And I had this happen last year. I lost one of my core marketing leaders. She moved on to other projects. And I was in a really big pinch. I was on the back of 2 major program launches and I was working way too much. And I ran into a leader in my network, and I was just completely overwhelmed. She was like, how are you doing? And I just kind of was like, oh my gosh, I'm drowning. And, and she helped hone me. She had me get really specific. And she said, what does the ideal candidate look like? What skills specifically do you need? And then I was able to clarify, and she was like, I have 3 people for you to talk to. And so, obviously we hope we've gone through this process, but spreading the word is such an important part of just finding the right people. And the worst thing that can happen if you're putting out the word early on is that you have too many qualified candidates, which in my opinion is a pretty good problem to have. Now, I want to remind you here to don't just reach out to your regular business network. That again can lead to bias, quite frankly. This is something I've really had to focus on in my company from a diversity and inclusion perspective. Some of our networks are super white, or some of our networks are all women, or in the tech sector where I help do a lot of recruiting, there's a lot of men, quite frankly. And so trying to go beyond that is really important, and we have to be intentional about it. So expand beyond your core network by attending events. Obviously, we're doing that virtually now, but there are so many virtual networking events, whether they're Chamber of Commerce events or entrepreneurial events or mixers. Find a virtual event, take part in it, try and meet other people. Ask your friends, be very specific in who you're after whenever doing that. Incentivize your team to make great referrals. I know a lot of companies who have recruiting success by paying out a referral commission to team members. They just always wait to pay that out maybe after somebody's been there for 6 months to really make sure the candidate's going to stick. Sharing on social media, and not just sharing the posting, but asking people to please share with their networks, because their networks may look very different than yours does. Reaching out to school programs. I know a lot of companies that have a lot of great hires that have come their way, either as interns or as more seasoned employees, by simply partnering with schools that have programs that turn out candidates that are aligned with the work they're doing. So for example, for me, I might partner with a business school that has a really great marketing program and be able to reach out to professors and say, who's your greatest new crop of folks coming out of their program? And if you don't have a direct relationship, you can still build relationships with schools through job fairs. I know a ton of universities have held virtual job fairs this year, so that's a great way to hire candidates. I also have had great hiring success on sharing on community platforms. So I am on platforms like the Girl Boss Network and the Riveter. I'm also in a group on Facebook called the F-Bomb. And so those are all kind of community groups that, again, reach a much wider base than my network, and I can post and share about job opportunities there. I've hired 3 people that way now. And then also, last but not least, there's always the hiring a recruiter option, especially if you're really having a struggle finding somebody in your network that has a certain type of experience or a talent fit, or you're really trying to reach a more diverse pool of candidates. So all important things to think about. I think, sometimes we just, think about the people we know. We've got to go beyond that, particularly from a diversity and inclusion perspective, to reach those real qualified folks that are out there. Okay, breathe. Beyond just putting out the word yourself, it's also really vital to get your team involved in the hiring process. So have them sit in on and shape internal conversations about what an ideal candidate could and should look like, and also have them think through their connections to see if they know somebody who might be a fit for a role. Some of the best hires I've ever made in my career have come from internal referrals, because they came with an extra layer of accountability. People want to show up and be a good employee and be a good representative on behalf of that friend who recommended them for the job, or that person in their network that recommended them for the job. And so there's a level of accountability that comes with hiring from this way. But beyond just asking your employees to just comb through their mental Rolodex, you can also get them involved by doing things like sharing about their experiences working for the company. So, I saw this great thing online when I was researching for this presentation, where LinkedIn had employees do this kind of fun social media campaign where a guy strapped a GoPro to his head, and he literally recorded this day in the life at LinkedIn. And so you see him going into meetings and all the different things he does in a day. And that was a social media piece they shared to give people a sense of what it could look like for the company. You can also have people share about things that they love about the company. I have a client who they do every other Friday as a day off during the summer for their employees, and they are in a recruiting season right now, and they had a couple of employees share about how they get every other day off during the summer, or every other Friday off during the summer online, and it drove up their recruiting traffic because a bunch of people were like, oh my gosh, I want to work at a company like that. So have employees share in genuine ways about what they love about working for you, and that can get a good way to get eyeballs on your jobs. You can also ask employees who they've worked with in the past that they think would be a cultural fit for the company. You can encourage them to connect with those folks and take them out for, I guess, virtual lunch these days. I would say regular lunch normally, but maybe you could buy them all some Postmates or buy them all some Uber Eats, and they can catch up over Zoom and have them tell that person a little bit about the company. Have your employees add we're hiring, on their social media networks, particularly on LinkedIn, where it's somebody's little title or byline, so that people realize that they're working for a company that's hiring. And then you can ask them, of course, to just share the direct job posting on social media. And again, asking their networks to pick that up. So definitely make sure that you're using your team, because, you know, you should really see your team as a part of this recruiting force. And don't just have your team be a part of the recruiting process either. Also include them in the hiring itself. So have them help conduct things like early phone interviews, and then have anyone that it makes sense to sit on in-person interviews as well. You know, they can be really your force that helps screen for culture, and it can also have these moments where somebody could have a different experience with a candidate than you do. You know, especially if you're the leader, somebody might treat you differently, and so they can be aware of, again, biases and blind spots that you might have for a candidate and give you that feedback. But ultimately, your employees should be your best, you know, advocates for the company, and so bring them into this process wherever possible. Okay, so we've got the word out, we created our job posting, we're putting out the word to the world that we're hiring, and we're starting to see potential team members come our way. But how do you really know who is a fit and who's worth your time? The last thing that any leader wants to do is just waste endless hours on phone calls and interviews. So it's really important to put in some screening layers to weed out as many people as possible that we just know aren't going to work out. So one of the first things we can do is to put in place some really strict and clear guidelines up front as part of the application process. So beyond just being like, send us our resume, get super specific. So one thing that I do is I say, and I usually make it something kind of weird, like put what's your favorite, like what your favorite color is, dash your name in the subject line. Just because I'm trying to catch somebody, like trip somebody up, quite frankly. I want to see if somebody's going to read the details into the instructions that I've put on the posting, or if I've put it out on social media. Because if somebody sends me their resume, but they don't put that thing in the subject line, or they don't put that thing inside the email that I've asked for, I know right away they're not paying attention to detail, and that's an ultimate just quick no for me. You can also use a workflow tool, or you know, some of these hiring sites have, you know, kind of an application process in that, where you can put in screener questions or sometimes even test activities. You know, this is a really great way also to test out if somebody's tech savvy, especially if that's important for the role you're hiring. You know, if there's some sort of workflow or steps that somebody has to go through and they can't even get through them, but you really need somebody who's able to work with a bunch of different, you know, integrated tools, that's probably a good sign that somebody isn't a fit for you. I also look for people who try and like circumvent the process. So again, if I've said this is the process to apply and they just try and email me directly, that's an out for me. You haven't followed the steps as they were outlined, which doesn't give me confidence that I can delegate work to you and you're going to follow instructions. And then, you know, again, be super specific. Like, what do they need to include? Is it just a resume, or is there a portfolio of work? Is there, you know, a cover letter? And you can also consider asking candidates for other things. So I mentioned screening questions. You know, you could have like 3 screening questions as part of a software, or 3 screening questions they have to answer in a body of an email, a cover letter if you feel like it's relevant. I've also, you know, in different hiring stages, I used to use a technology where we were able to ask candidates to do a short recorded video. I also do this now for candidates. I send them Loom, which is a technology we use, and say, record a short Loom video talking about yourself and why this is a great role for you. And that's a great test point for somebody. And also asking for samples of past work can be a really good way to again, do some upfront screening and see if they follow instructions, see if the work is of the caliber, and then that's your kind of first step. And if those people pass go, then you can offer them an initial interview. Now, this could be with you if it's just you doing the hiring, or if possible, if you have another team member that is going to be working closely with this hire, that's usually who I put in this place. As my team grows, I always put myself at the later stages of the hiring process because I'm going to be more removed from working with that person on a day-to-day. And so if it's a no for my team, ultimately it's a no for me because they're the one who's going to be sitting with this person. So whoever is going to be most closely with the person hired, they do the screener interview. And prior to that interview, you know, make sure that you're putting together a set of questions that will really tease out what are the candidate's values, what are their skill sets, and are they a fit for our culture? And you just need to make sure that there's some way to not just record what that person's answers to those questions are, but maybe even like a scoring system, especially if there's multiple people who are going to be interviewing at different times, just so that you can weight, the answers to the questions relevantly. There's a million and one, you can Google on the internet, great hiring questions to ask. You just got to make sure you're not dancing in any waters that are discriminatory, and making sure that they're, all legal questions you're able to ask somebody. For example, in Washington State, you absolutely cannot ask somebody what they used to make at their previous position. So just keep those things in mind. And depending on the size of your company and the rigor of the application process, you might want to have this pre-interview, you might not. I really like the pre-interview because I don't want to schedule a full hour on my calendar if somebody's not going to be, able to move on to the next round. And so I always have the 10 to 15 minute pre-interview as part of the process, just to see if somebody's presence and their experience and how they act on the phone or on Zoom really matches as they appeared in email and on paper. And then if they go through that pre-interview, they shine, then that's when we get them into a real initial interview. And prior to that initial interview, we're doing things like double checking their social media and online presence to make sure they're a value and a culture fit. I think that people should have their own life online, but there's red flags to me, particularly from a values perspective that exist out there. And so I don't want to find that after the fact. I want to look for it. I used to be in a role where, we had to be super public facing on social media. And so making sure that my hires didn't have anything out there on the internet that a potential client could search for and find that would lose us customers was really critical. So it's important to think about that when you're hiring, especially if it's going to be a customer facing person. And then in that, leading up to the initial interview, I might do a skills test. So, is there a project that we could have them do? Especially if they pass that initial interview, we usually put a small paid project there, be it a design project or a copywriting project, or anything where you can just test out the skills and abilities they claim to have or the technologies they're saying that they can use. And then after that, I reach out to references. And you might also want to consider doing a background check, depending on the nature of your business, the sensitivity of client information, especially if you're handling financials. I always recommend a background check. So that's everything that goes into getting somebody into what I call the final interview. Final interview, I always try and only do these with around 2 to 3 candidates. I want to really have it narrowed down at this point. And again, I'm at a point in my leadership level that I'm having my team really handle everything upstream. And then that final interview is a chance for them to get to meet me, ask me questions. That's something I really look for in a final interview. Are they curious about the company? Do they want to know about my vision for growth? Do they want to ask me about what their growth path could be for this role? I look for all of that. And then once those interviews are over, we review our notes as a team. And we get, anybody who's involved in the hiring process in a room. We talk about who stood out and why. And then we rank our candidates accordingly. And then we decide who's going to get the first offer and who we should keep on file for future opportunities. We like to assume that the first offer is going to take the job, and so far so good on that one. But we always have a backup and make a point not to give a decline to any of those final candidates until we've got an acceptance on an offer from that final candidate. So again, just reminders here, get your team involved as much as possible in the hiring process. It can really help combat our individual biases. It can also bring to light if somebody has a different answer or acts differently towards other people as opposed to you as the leader. And it allows the team to get a feel for if the person is a fit for company culture. So any questions, horror stories there that have happened, feel free to jot them in. And then let's talk about what goes into the offer itself. So when you and your team have a consensus on what you found to be is an ideal candidate, it's time to really make that official. So this looks like extending an offer letter to the candidate. And then if all goes as planned, you're hoping that they're going to accept it. But prior to making that offer, you really want to make sure that you know what is firm and what in that offer is open to negotiation, so that you know how to guide that discussion when you introduce the offer to the potential candidate. Now, what I recommend as a process here is to make that offer first over the phone or over a virtual call like Zoom, and then you follow it up with an offer letter. It's always joyful to be able to offer somebody work, and so if you can do that over the phone and see their smiling face or hear that they're excited, you know, or they might just accept on the spot, those are all great things, but we follow it up with a formal letter to make it legal. Now, things to include that your employee is going to be wondering about in this conversation, and you need to be really clear on up front before going into making that offer, are the job details. So what is the role and the capacity/time expected to fill that role? So is it part-time or is it full-time? Who will they report to? What does the work entail? What are the duties and responsibilities? The ramp up. So is it somebody who's going to be immediately in a full-time position, or is it going to be a contract to hire? This is a really, really important lesson I want to drive home here. Contract to hire can be a really valuable model. It allows you to test somebody out, and it's completely legal to do. Many companies I've worked for do it, give somebody a 90-day contract period contingent on a full offer should they meet the goals outlined in that onboarding period. So talk to somebody, you know, if there's a contract to hire model, be really clear that that's the model you're starting out with. Talk about pay. Is it hourly or salaried? Are there bonuses or variable compensation or commission? How often, when and where, and how will they be paid? How much will they be paid? And, you know, make sure that when you're thinking about pay too, that you're doing your research, you're aligning the offer in accordance with your budget or your band for the role and that person's experience. So if I'm offering a range for a role, which is like 55 to 60,000, and they were the most experienced or qualified candidate, I'm always going to offer them on the higher end of their band. I really believe that giving somebody a higher pay encourages them to aim higher as well. And it also minimizes the negotiation back and forth. If somebody's qualified, just give them what they're owed. I'm seeing a couple comments in here that people have to jump to another meeting, but please know that you're going to get the playback in your email. So if there's anything you missed, you can watch the last half hour in that playback. So then the next thing you need to include here is benefits. So if there's paid time off, remote work options, vacation days, sick days, health insurance, wellness benefits, I'm even seeing tuition reimbursement these days, give back opportunities. I used to have this as a benefit when I worked for Intuit, where, you know, they would do an employer match for giving back to charitable organizations, 401k, shares in your company. Remember also that benefits can be where you can really bulk up your offer if you can't compete on salary alone. So take some time to think about what those are. Those are also really good negotiation points. So if you've got some that you want to hold off, you know, and maybe tease out in a negotiation, that's something to consider as well. You also want to have an at-will statement. This is just a statement that tells them that the offer is on an at-will basis and that you can terminate their employee or they can leave the company at any time. It's legally required. Also, you want your deadline for acceptance so that you can move on to other candidates as needed. I usually give people a maximum of a week so that I'm not leaving other candidates hanging if this person declines. And then contact details for questions. So those are all the pieces that need to go into that offer experience. And there's great pre-existing formats. So if you didn't write those all down, you can go out on the internet and find 1,000,001 different offer letter templates that you can use to really simplify things. But going into that offer conversation, you need to be open to negotiation, but also clear on what's not up for discussion and why. So for me, you know, there are some things that are not open for discussion, and I will straight up say, you know, we can't go higher for this role because we don't have the budget for it. That's really clear. But where I can meet you is maybe on the benefit side or something like that. Also be firm in how much back and forth you'll do. So too many rounds of negotiating back and forth with a candidate can really lead for you to lose other people. I've had this happen before where we did 3 rounds of back and forth and then we lost a really qualified second candidate because they took another job offer, and that's so disappointing because then you have to go all the way back to the beginning because you were wasting this back and forth time. So be clear that you're open to maybe 2 rounds of negotiation tops but you have a clear deadline because you don't want to lose people. And then after you get all those offer documents out the door, your goal is to start getting your employee to accept your offer. And so that involves getting your hiring contract in place. It's also an important moment to think about internal agreements, such as your privacy practices or non-competes or mutual NDAs. That's what I have people sign here. Other people do like a security agreement at this point or a consent agreement. I do mutual NDAs and some security agreements given the nature of our work and how much intellectual property we create. I have some really clear legal language about what people can and can't do with the materials they create as part of our company. This is also when you're going to start doing things like, a W-9 or a W-4, depending on if they're a contractor or not, your tax withholding forms, direct deposit, all those things. And, if you're somebody who's not, a professional or hasn't hired before, talk with a trusted advisor or an accounting professional about how to help in this hiring process, especially for things like payroll or workers' comp or IRS forms. I really am a big believer in leaving those things to the experts. So get one involved and also talk upstream. Don't just be hiring willy-nilly without double checking your cash flow and budget with your advisor. That piece is really important. Okay. So after all the legwork and the paperwork, we might be feeling like we need a little bit of a breather, but now you've actually reached the most important piece from a team building perspective, which is where you can really make or break the experience of a new employee with the company. And this is where we start to onboard and integrate our new team members into the culture and the roles and the responsibilities that go with the job they've accepted. And it really needs to be handled with care. So there's a book that I really love that I just recommend anybody read at this moment, which is called The Power of Moments. And it talks about in this book, how there are all these moments in life that should be a big deal, but we make them a little bit mundane and we gloss over them too quickly. And starting a job is a really big moment. It's a big deal for people. And so I want you to think about how you're making it meaningful. In the book, they talk about the company John Deere and how, employees used to just come on their first day of work and just get an employee handbook and an empty cubicle. And they had a lot of attrition of people who ended up leaving the company because, let's be honest, not everybody's like wildly excited about working on tractors and marketing about tractors all day. But what they did is they really changed their welcome experience. They turned it into an actual moment that was meaningful. They had new employees get to do these lunches with existing employees and leadership and really made them feel like they were a part of a company. And it really turned around their ability to retain quality people. So I want you to think about a little bit, what is the story you want somebody to tell about what their first day experience was in their new role? Who did they meet on that first day? What did they learn? How did they become a part of your team? And let's be honest, it's a weird time right now to hire people. We're not necessarily like able to sit down and pat somebody on the back and have lunch with them face to face. But we're already starting to see these successes and stories of people that are building virtual teams, by doing fun things like, a virtual lunch date where, again, they're like getting delivery sent to the new employee and then sitting over Zoom together to make a meaningful moment happen. So think about that a little bit as we start talking about bringing team members on board. So when somebody accepts a role, we're going to make a point to align with them alongside anybody who's going to be in charge of their employee onboarding. And we want to do this in advance of their start date. So you want to do your best to get any logisticals or technicals out of the way up front. So they're really set up to show up and dive into the work and the training and not just do paperwork on their first day. So if you can, handle all of that in advance by taking care of any necessary requirements like key paperwork that we talked about a couple slides ago, like all of the W-4s and things like that, which of course you can find listed out on articles on the web. Also getting them set up with equipment they need to do their work. So there's nothing worse than like showing up on your first day and not having a computer or the phone or the cables or the special equipment, uniform, whatever the thing these people need. Make sure they have it in advance. Also, if somebody's working from home and going to be on camera, this is a kind of a COVID thing that I think a lot of people have been needing to get better about. It's just double checking that your employee actually has like a good place to work with a clean backdrop, working internet connection, and talking to people about how important this is, especially if they're going to be talking with clients or they're going to be, working with team members. Nothing's more awkward than, starting to try and onboard somebody virtually and them not even having good internet. And then giving them access to any accounts or necessary software and a secure way to store all their passwords, along with maybe a refresher course on your company's security policies, is really important. And again, can you get these things out of the way so that they can show up and start working on their first day? And when we think about starting to do the work, I don't actually mean like dump a pile of work on the plate on the first few days. I want you to focus instead on your why. So really great onboarding starts with who you are as a leader, welcome from you as the CEO or founder. It talks about company history and the values and the vision, an overview of your brand, meeting your team, so doing group calls or one-to-one moments or a mix of the two. Overview of how you work, so how do we interact on Slack, or what do we use email for, or what are our business boundaries? Like for my team personally, we show everybody how we use Slack, because not everyone knows how to, and we show them the purpose of different channels we use. And we also are really clear that we only text people for friendship-based stuff. So I'm never going to text an employee about something related to work. That's breaking a business boundary to me. So we're really clear about that up front. And then if you have other things like rituals or routines that you guys do, daily stand-ups or check-ins or funny little GIF activities, you don't want somebody to feel left out in those moments, especially when they're the new kid on the block. So just getting somebody up to speed on like the way you communicate or play or connect with each other is really important, especially in our virtual cultures right now. And then you want to lay out the plan. So once you've gotten somebody focused on like who the company is, maybe that's the first day or the first couple days, then you've got the plan. So, what will the next week look like? What will the first, second, third month look like? Plan a path of meaningful work that builds on itself, and be clear about the goals along the way. Also be clear about who they'll report to and who can be there to help them, or who could be a buddy for them as they're getting up to speed. And then also be really clear about when check-ins are going to happen with that person and who those check-ins will be with. Now, software can be a big help here. I'm a big fan of, we use a tool called Nuclino, which is where we store kind of all of not only our internal understanding of who we are as a company and how we do things, but also our onboarding process. There's also other employee onboarding tools out there. This is just the one that we've built out for us. And this process, of building things out is obviously time consuming, but it also makes sure you get really clear on the process of how you do what you do as a company so that you can pass it on to a person. And I can promise you, if you take the time to build this stuff once, it really pays off in the long term. Now, onboarding doesn't just end at the end of the first week or the first month. It's really important that you make sure that you and your new employees have a regular opportunity to check in and offer feedback and adjust those plans as needed. Sometimes, we lay out this best laid plan, but people, something comes up or the strategy changes or, what's required of the job shifts. And so we always need to have these check-in moments so that we can, make those adjustments as needed, and also hear from the new team member about their experience and how their role is going. So I make a point to do these check-ins myself with employees along with the direct manager, because I really want to get to know my employees better and make them feel like they have a connection and an open line of communication to me as the company's leader. And then I make a point to schedule 30, 60, and 90-day check-ins as soon as somebody is hired. And I use them as an opportunity to ask questions like, how are you liking this role? What is your favorite part of the work that you're doing right now? How are you getting along with the team? Are there any areas we can be supporting you better? Or do you have any feedback on the onboarding process or feedback on our leadership? And once we've reached that 90-day mark, we really feel like we should have a solid sense if somebody is going to work out for our company. Of course, there's always been cases where we don't even make it half that far and we realize that somebody's not cut out for the job. We also have the opposite happen. We get at 30 to 45 days and we're like, they're crushing it. And that's like the best experience to have. But don't beat yourself up if you go through this process and somebody doesn't work out. but make sure that you have check-ins in place there so that you're going to be accountable as a leader, to not just dragging somebody out hoping that they're going to work out, but you have clear indicators of when they're not meeting the goals and expectations that was outlined for the role, so that you can start getting ready to go back out and try and find somebody else or revisit some of those past candidates. Now, also, after that 90-day mark, don't just let somebody fall off a cliff. Make sure that you check in with your team in a more formal fashion at least 2 times a year. In my opinion, so much can happen in a year, especially a year like 2020. And I don't believe an annual review is enough anymore. I think an annual review could be your official evaluation, but especially during somebody's first year or 2 at the company, where they're really just getting to know the organization and growing within it, make a point to check in at least at some level with employees about their performance and their satisfaction every 6 months or so. Now, beyond the check-in moments with your new hires, it's also really important to take time with the rest of your team to assess how things are going with them and that new addition. Your goal here is really to get a sense of, is the team feeling connected? Are there bottlenecks? Are there issues when it comes to communication among team members? And you also want to verify that the new hire is on par in terms of the caliber of work and that they're producing and meeting what is expected of them by other team members. You know, are they dragging? Are they totally crushing it? Do they feel disengaged? That's all feedback that your team can be giving you, especially if you're not working with that person on a day-to-day basis. And the reason we want to inquire about all these things is to get a really clear sense of if somebody is really integrating into the team, or if they aren't fitting in, or they're rubbing people the wrong way. The biggest mistake we can make as leaders from a team building perspective is not focusing enough on the team as the whole, the team that we have, and recognizing that a new person brings in new energy and changes the dynamic of that team. And hopefully our goal is always to hire people that shift that dynamic for the better. But if that's not the case, the last thing you want to do as a leader is lose somebody who's talented and experienced with tons of institutional knowledge because they feel unhappy or pushed out by somebody who's new to the business. And that's why I said before, you know, my biggest mantra is hire slow, fire quickly. And I learned this the hard way when I was early on in my hiring career. I had an experience where I was a director level leader inside an organization, and we had gone through a big round of candidates and we narrowed it down, and I was really pulling for one candidate, and the leadership decided to pull for another. And I had expressed my concerns about the hiring process throughout the hiring process, because I had seen this person, this candidate, appear very, very different in every single interview. So she was almost like a chameleon. She was one person with one of my employees. She treated a different employee totally differently, a little bit confrontational. She was completely different with me. And then I watched her on interviews with our executive team, and she was a completely different person again. And I had my concerns. And she showed up for the first week on the job, and due to the nature of the work week, I was out traveling, training at a different company. And so, her direct manager, who was new in a management role, started writing me on really early in the week, just saying, like, this is not working. She is not being accountable. She is not doing the things that we've outlined from an onboarding perspective. She was sending me screenshots of like nasty things she was saying in Slack. And by like the third day of this, even though I wasn't in the office, I was like, nope, that's it, because I could see the way it was affecting that manager's morale, how upset she was, how frustrated she was to be coming into work every single day, having to deal with this person who was being basically a bratty child. And that manager was a really talented employee. And the last thing I wanted to do was ruin her morale and have that ripple throughout my team, or lose the knowledge and talent she brought to the table. So as painful as it was, for our leaders to admit, I made the executive call, and I just came in and I said, she's got to go. And we fired her by the third day. And I think this is really, really important. There's too many people who let people drag on and say, oh, maybe it'll change and maybe it'll be better. But I've always said, you've got 3 people. You've got the person whose resume is turned in, the person who shows up on the interview, and the person who shows up on the first day. And if those 3 people aren't the same people, that's a really bad sign, and you might not have made a good hire. So it's really, really important to recognize that when it's starting to come to light, and let go of those people quickly so you can keep your existing team happy. And we've got to remember that even if we don't, put in all this, even if we put in all this work up front and things don't work out, people, that we hire are going to change over time. People are going to grow. They're going to move on from our organizations. And so that means we've always got to be, as leaders, on the lookout for new talent to bring into our organization. So whether that's, the folks you've got already in leadership positions, growing into the next layers of their career, or going on and leaving your organization, we've just got to do really regular organizational reviews with our team members and our management to check and see where things are changing. We've got to check in regularly with our existing team members and managers to get a pulse point for who's in and who's out, who's ready for the next steps in their career. It's better to keep open lines of communication with your team than to be left hanging because you didn't check in with somebody and they were like, actually 6 months ago, I decided I was on my way out and I've already been looking for new jobs, but you didn't know it because you weren't checking in with me. Also, remember that you want to continue to build your network and build relationships with other people who you see as connectors, who are going to be, connected to the right type of talent that you're after, and know what you're doing and kind of follow the growth of your organization, so you can call on those folks when you need to build out your bench a little bit more. And really build into your brand and your team this recruiting mindset, so that everybody feels like, there's opportunities to grow in the company and they can be talking about that to their wider community. And then also, I always think it's a nice touch to consider having an open role or two on your website, especially if you have a role that you're always kind of needing to hire for. Like in a lot of tech companies, this might be a support or a sales role, but always have something open on the website just so that you have word out there that you're a growing company. And it's better to have a solid set of candidates to call on than to start from scratch every single time you're hiring. Now, the last thing today before we get to our takeaways is just this reminder that one of the biggest opportunities we have as business owners and leaders is to really coach people into creating their best work and their potential. And it can be hard for us to let go sometimes. Again, we talked about being control freaks, but it's really important to share the vision, because that's exactly how your company can grow bigger and better than it could have been if it's just you on your own. So talk to your team regularly about the values and the visions and the next steps the company is taking. Create new roles and opportunities for your team to grow their skills and shine. No one wants to just sit in the same role for years on end. And if they do, they likely aren't going to be aligned with the growth goals that you have for your company. So make a point to just talk to team members. Ask them things like, what do you want to take on next? What work do you find most exciting and challenging? Are there other areas of the business that you want to try on? Do you want to lead people? Do you want to take on, a next role? And if so, what do you want that to look like? Co-creating a growth plan with your team members can be a really powerful process. It puts you in the seat of a coach and you get to watch people evolve, which is like one of the most amazing things to get to do as a leader. And it also means that you have a conversation that you can revisit and check in with people about. Maybe their plans change over time and you've got to be having lines of communication to know that. So talk regularly to make sure that the work you're creating for your team members still matters and feels aligned with the goals you've laid out together. And be honest too if there's a ceiling to some roles or if things have shifted inside of the organization, so somebody doesn't think they're going to grow into a role that no longer exists. Also, always know that it's okay that sometimes people will simply outgrow your company or their life plans will change, but you should always sit in a seat where you feel like you were able to develop people by being a part of your organization and be proud of the skills they gained while they were a part of your company. Okay, guys, I'm going to wrap up with 5 big takeaways, and these are just the things that I really want you to remember from this session. I'm also going to share all of this after you with the webinar. So you're going to get the slides, you're going to get the recording, you're going to get an amazing in-depth guidebook. We customized it specifically for the webinar. It's our team building best practices guidebook, but we expanded it with a whole section of questions that can spark ideas and help you get clarity on how to improve your team building practice. And of course, you can share these materials with your team. If you want to share them with a friend who didn't attend this session, this is something that I'd like you to maybe send them my way first. That would be appreciated. But definitely love creating these kind of materials to help people, scale more successfully. So 5 core takeaways. Document. You got to get a clear sense of what's on your plate and what you can delegate first and foremost to understand where the gaps are and what kinds of skills and experiences are needed to fill them. 2, get clear on who you need to hire, not just skill set, but personality type, prior experience. Do they have a sense of humor? All of the qualities that make an ideal candidate and really a fit for not just the job description, but the right kind of culture you're trying to build. Spread the word and get your team involved. So beyond just posting jobs online and notifying your network, have your team help get the message out there, and also have them help screen candidates so that you can do your best to have them be a part of recruiting, interviewing, and selecting and onboarding team members so it really feels a part of the team you're building. 4, when you're hiring, take your time. Urgency leads to the wrong hire. I've seen it happen time and time again. So do your best to hire before your back is against the wall. And if you have to hire somebody, really ask yourself again and again, would I hire this person if we didn't need help as soon as possible? Because if the answer is no, they're not really a fit for your culture. And it's really important to screen for values, and it's really important to screen for skills, and it's really important to screen for work ethic. And when somebody isn't working out, don't just let it drag out on the team. Take swift action, let the person go, give clear feedback, and go back to other candidates or back to the drawing board. Lastly, make a point to connect with your team at a personal level. Talk to them about their personal goals for growth and development. Allow their work to evolve and continue to be challenging and meaningful, and always look for opportunities to coach your team to take on bigger roles and new skills so that they feel like their job helps them grow professionally and personally. So these are my 5 takeaways. I want to hear yours. Let me know in the chat if there was something that landed home for you, made a big difference in your thought process in terms of building a team. And then last but not least, this is my call to action for you. So if you're not a part of our Learning Lab community already, this is where our best of the best goes in terms of content. We're actually having a session next week. It's all about client onboarding. It's going to be amazing. I've got 2 really talented experts coming in to teach and train on that. We'll include details about Learning Lab if you haven't explored it already in our follow-up email to this session, along with all of your takeaway content. And last but not least, we've got time for a couple questions. So if you want to ask them in the chat, please do so. If you want to ask them to meet personally, you can do so by reaching out to hello@fearlessintraining.com. If you want to follow me and connect with me outside of this session, these are all of my social media handles as well. But curious to hear from you all. What burning questions do you have left in terms of team building? Going to give you guys a couple seconds here to chime in the chat. I'd also love to hear, what were your biggest takeaways? Okay, I had one question come through. It was, what was the biggest mistake you ever made when building a team? There's been a few. I mean, a lot of these best practices came out of hard lessons. One of the biggest takeaways or biggest mistakes I made early on in my career was that hiring from a place of urgency. So I was working for a new company. We went to a major conference and I came home with like 875 leads. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to hire somebody like yesterday. And I ran into somebody and he seemed like a fit. He'd been doing kind of a similar sales job. And I just hired out of that state of urgency rather than really vetting him and testing him. There were early indicators in the interview process. We had him do a demo, and I knew that the demo he was doing was basically like him repeating a script. He wasn't prepared, and I hired him anyways because I just felt like I was in such a pinch. And needless to say, he didn't work out. A couple months later, I was back at the drawing board with too much work on my plate, scrambling to find another employee. So that was really where that message of hire slow, fire quickly became really important for me to learn a little bit the hard way. Ooh, there's another question here. What do you think should be the first hire of any business? This is a really good question. And I think it's an important moment to just look at your strength as a leader. It's going to really depend on what you're great at and what you're not. Like I said, I'm not great at administrative, so it was really important for my first hire to be somebody with those skills. I know a lot of other people who are great at that administrative or operational work, but they're not good at where I'm strong, which is the creative side of the business. And so maybe your first hire should be somebody who's more on the creative side. So this is a little bit personal. I would say look at your own strengths. Again, like what is that list of things you're doing? where do you avoid work, or where do you feel like, ugh, that's like a total energy drain that I don't want to do. That's where your first hire should fall, is looking at your weaknesses and trying to find a hire that aligns with it. Those are great questions. If I don't see any others, I will wrap us up for the day. But these were fantastic, and I loved getting to share with all of you. If this session was meaningful to you, if it was helpful, the things that help me is by spreading the word on the internet. We're always looking for new folks to connect with. So if there was a big takeaway or a wow moment for you and you want to share that on social media, tag me, please. That would be fantastic. And keep coming back. We've got lots of great sessions that are coming up in the months ahead, and I always love an opportunity to teach and train. So thank you so much for creating that today for me, guys, and have a great rest of your day.